Welcome to Fireside Giants. My name is Alex with my co-host here, Anthony Rivardo. Today we're talking trade back scenario. We're going to go through a bunch of different scenarios as the offseason progresses with the Giants in the 11th overall pick, whether they go for a wide receiver, a defender, a pass rusher. If they elect to trade back, maybe there's a quarterback needy team that sees a guy that they like, Trey Lance, for example, at 11. They're like, okay, let's go trade up, get our guy. And the Giants could potentially maximize their assets by doing so. But, of course, you might have to give up an option like Jalen Waddle or Kyle Pitts or even Micah Parsons, who we've been taking a look at. We're going to do a film review of him in a few days because a lot of people have him now dropping to 11. And if he drops to 11, I'm a big fan of Micah Parsons. I think he's an impact player. He really makes that defense so much better. And helps supplement the loss of some guys they might have to shed because of the cap space projected to go a little bit lower to under $75 million. But for the most part, I'm pretty excited about this trade back scenario. This is one Anthony came up with himself, and just trying to tailor the needs of the Giants to what they should do in the draft. So Anthony, my friend, how are you doing? And tell us a little bit about your scenario.
I'm doing good. I'm very hungry though, but we'll push that aside for now. This scenario really, it begins with free agency. How does that shape out? And it's all, this is a hypothetical scenario. I'm not saying any of this is going to happen, but if the Giants land a wide receiver in free agency, what are they going to do in the draft? Are they going to continue to add playmakers on offense, or are they going to focus on the defense? Or should they trade down and gain more draft capital and more assets and draft more players than they would have otherwise? Personally, I think that's a pretty good idea. Trading down, I'm a big fan of the trade down. I know the Giants tried to trade down last year, but there was no takers. Nobody wanted to trade up to 4. So, they just stayed put, and they took Andrew Thomas. I think most of us are happy with that, but maybe the Giants this year, I know a lot of fans don't want to see them trade down from 11 because they're scared about, not getting a good player in the later round or the later portion of the first round. I think there's quite a few guys who could be available in the 20-ish range, like 17 to 22, somewhere in there. 17 to 23. I think there's a lot of guys that can actually make a really solid impact on the Giants' defense, or maybe even on offense if you wanted to double down in that range of picks. So I think if the Giants wanted to trade down, there are a couple of teams that will be looking to trade up. I think you could even see the Chicago Bears consider a trade up if they want to go draft a Trey Lance, a quarterback. If Trey Lance is on the board at 11, I think that's a perfect opportunity for the Giants to trade down. And I think there's a couple of guys or a couple of teams that would consider moving up to get a quarterback. And even maybe not a quarterback. Maybe the Giants, maybe someone really good falls to 11 and the Giants are just like, no thanks. And somebody wants to trade up for them. Maybe it's Kyle Pitts. Let's throw Kyle Pitts out there. Maybe the Giants don't want to draft a tight end. They don't want Kyle Pitts. But another team really wants Kyle Pitts. Maybe they'll trade up for him. You never know. So the Giants can always have an opportunity to trade down. And if they can trade down from 11 and land in that 20-ish range, I think there's a few players that they could select there. And they would also probably get an additional third-round pick in a trade like that. And I think that's really where you see the value added from that trade. Because there's a few guys in the third round that I think are pretty solid, that can impact the Giants pretty well. So, and that'll connect to the first part of this whole scenario. So the first thing is you let Dalvin Tomlinson walk in free agency. Now, I love Dalvin Tomlinson. I think he's great, and he's gotten better every single year that he's been in the NFL, which is, really impressive. Like his pass rushing abilities have just improved year to year. But he's going to be paid quite a bit of money in free agency, and the Giants are right now $3 million over the cap. They're going to restructure some contracts, cut some guys, maybe trade some guys, and they're going to get below the cap. But how far below the cap can they get? I'm not sure. They definitely can't get far enough to where they can sign a wide receiver and keep Dalvin Tomlinson. So if they do let Dalvin Tomlinson walk, maybe they can still get a wide receiver. And that's where the ball starts to get rolling on this. Because if you sign a wide receiver in free agency, I think it really opens up a lot of options for you in the first round of the 2021 NFL Draft. And I think that you can actually add another piece to the defense. Our defense is already pretty good, but I think you can make it even better. And I think that's where that trade down scenario comes into play. What do you think, Alex?
I mean, I agree. I also believe that they will probably let Dalvin Tomlinson walk. And for the major reason that it's easier to replace a 0-1 technique player, a guy that plays over the center, inside shade of the guard. Easier to replace a big run stuffer than it is to replace a Leonard Williams type of player who, can line up at 3 technique, 1 technique, 2, and even 5 tech, and really can act as a pass rusher. Those 3 technique guys are super valuable in the NFL because, Patrick Graham was able to scheme Leonard Williams to more 1v1 matchups, which is why he was able to get those sack numbers up. You just need a big body who can soak up double teams in the middle of the offensive line and defensive front. So that's kind of what I think they'll do, and this scenario kind of tailors around finding a big body that the Giants could say, okay, let's add that guy into the mix, replace Dalvin Tomlinson for much cheaper, like significantly cheaper, a second rounder. And, then you have a player who can replace the production or at least just act as that big body to soak up double teams and let Leonard Williams, do his thing on those 1v1 matchups. But, that letting Dalvin Tomlinson go is tough. And the reason is he actually became really good friends with Leonard Williams this past year. And they're close. That dynamic duo is something that the Giants don't want to let go because they do have the potential to get even better with the second year in the same scheme. So that is a big, big con for me. Obviously, a lot of Giants fans don't want to see Dalvin Tomlinson walk. He's a guy that really saw his production increase year over year. He's a homegrown talent. He's a great guy to have in the locker room. He's just a stellar guy and man overall. And he's super talented. So those, you never want to let talented guys go. But we've seen them do this in the past. Linval Joseph, Jonathan Hankins, and they just kind of rotate those guys, right? So essentially, they're just not gonna re-sign those big 1-0 technique interior defenders because they know they can draft a guy second, third round and replace their production pretty easily. We've seen them successfully do this over the years, right?
Yeah, and I have a couple of names to throw out there. One of them is Mcneil. I actually really like this guy. He is a 0 tech. He lines up right over the center, nose tackle, but he can rush the passer. And that's really unique from the 0 tech position to be able to rush the passer. He's really big. He's 320 pounds.
Like a meatball.
But, yeah, he's a meatball. He's like a wrecking ball, just rolling through, getting sacks. Like his sack numbers aren't crazy, but he puts up pressures. Like he can rush the passer, and he's got a really quick first step. He gets off the line of scrimmage really quickly for a guy his size, especially. And he's very big. He's 6'2", 320 pounds, big guy, 0 tech, and that's a player to keep an eye on. I think the Giants. This is. When we're talking about Dave Gettleman and his fetish for defensive tackles, I think you could absolutely see him fall in love with a guy like Mcneil in the mid-rounds of the draft, and I think he'll be there in the second or third round. He's out of North Carolina State, if you want to look him up. And if you're not familiar, North Carolina State, B.J. Hill went to North Carolina State. He was a pretty solid hit for us in the third round before, he got pushed down the depth chart by Leonard Williams arriving. And then North Carolina State also just produces good professional defenders in the NFL. Bradley Chubb is another one that comes to mind. Like, that's a really good school, and they produce defenders, especially defensive linemen. So Mcneil, keep an eye on him. If they let Leonard or Dalvin Tomlinson walk, which we seem to think they will, Mcneil would be a perfect replacement in the second or third round.
Yeah, and Mcneil, he is a guy. The one thing I don't know much about him regarding his ability to stop the run, I don't know if he's a very high-profile run stopper. I do know that he is a much better pass rusher from that 0 technique, 1 technique spot. So I do like that idea of getting him in the second round with that acquired pick if you trade back. So that's kind of a good thing. I have to do a little bit more research on his run stopping abilities because that's Dalvin Tomlinson's strength. You have to be able to replicate that, right? The Giants really want to stop and dominate in the trenches. Stopping the run's a big part of that. So we'll have to do a little bit more research on Mcneil. I'm going to put some clips in the video just so you guys can see what we're talking about for each player that we mention. That way, you get an idea of like what we're seeing, why we think they could be a good fit, and why, Dave Gettleman, the fetish for interior defensive linemen, continues. And, maybe why he would fall in love with a guy like that, because he does love interior defenders who can get pressure on the quarterback. He's really quick. He can shoot those gaps. The only problem is, if he's getting double teamed, I don't know if he can fight through it. I don't know if he has the strength, if he has that ability. He's a player to work with. He's a guy that I think year 2, year 3, you'll see a lot of development from. He kind of reminds me a lot of B.J. Hill, actually, just in the sense that he is a very good pass rusher and might not be the best run stopper.
Yeah, but the difference is, though, B.J. Hill did play like more of the 3 tech. He wasn't a 0 tech, and that's kind of the difference there. But there's another name I'll throw out there. This is a guy from Ohio State University, Tommy Tagayi. I'm not sure how to say the name. But you watch him, he's pretty solid. He's a run defender. He's not a pass rusher. He's an early down run stuffer, A and B gap defender, so playing that 0 tech, that 1 tech, just lining up over the center and stuffing the run. So that's another name. So the reason that I, came up with this scenario in the first place is because I was looking at Dalvin Tomlinson. I was looking at the cap space. I'm like, man, I just don't know if it can happen. I don't know if we can keep him. but can we replace him? Is it feasible? Can we find replacements? So I started looking into the draft, and I'm like, man, there's like no good interior defensive lineman in the first round, second round of the draft, really. There's none of those really stud interior defensive linemen in this year's draft class. And I'm actually happy about that because I don't want Dave Gettleman to invest another first-round pick in the interior defensive line. But when you look at the second, third, fourth round of this draft class in terms of the interior defensive linemen, it's pretty strong. There's none of those premier guys who are going to go in round 1, but those middle rounds are pretty loaded with some solid, talented players. Another one like Tommy Tagai, Mcneil, these are two guys who I think you should really keep an eye on. The Giants, are they going to go with the heavy run stuffer or the guy who's a run stuffer but can also rush the passer? Either way, they need a zero tech if Dalvin Tomlinson walks. And I think that one of these two guys will absolutely have the opportunity to draft in the second or third round, and I think they absolutely should do it if they let Dalvin Tomlinson walk.
Yeah, I think Tommy Tagai is actually my preferred player in this scenario because he has that elite run-stopping trait to him.
But you know me, I like the pass rushers. So
you do, but that's why we have
thing.
Dexter Lawrence. I think Dexter Lawrence are going to ask him to be more of that pass-rushing force next year. You obviously, if you keep Leonard Williams, you still have that. Maybe you get another edge rusher. You have Lorenzo Carter way back.
Hear me out. Imagine the pass-rushing capabilities from a front three of, Mcneil rushing from the zero tech. So you got the interior pressure right there, and then Leonard Williams is a good pass rusher, and then Dexter Lawrence is a good pass rusher, and then if you have one of those guys off the edge, the pass rush gets nuts after that. Like if you have pass rushers in literally every defensive line position, plus you get maybe, since this is a trade down scenario, maybe you get Gregory Rousseau at the back end of the first round, and you put him on the edge. I'm not sure how he's going to play on the edge. I'm not the biggest fan of Gregory Rousseau, but if you want to take a chance on him, or the other guy out of Miami, Joseph Asai, I think his name is. I'm forgetting his name. If you want to take him at pick 20-ish in this trade down scenario, he's definitely going to play on the edge. So you get that, and then that interior defensive line is going to just kill opposing quarterbacks. Like they're just going to rush the passer. Like I don't know how you stop that. And then you got Blake Martinez, good run defender. You got ways to stop the run. Those guys are good at it. Dexter Lawrence is a beastly run defender. But those three, if they're all solid pass rushers, good luck to opposing offensive lines. That would get really scary.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. When you have that elite pass rush, it does mask a lot of deficiencies. If you have those second-level linebackers and safeties who can play up into the box, like Jabril Peppers, you can stop the run well. We know Xavier McKinney, he came on big. He's a guy that can go into the box and help stop the run as well. But for the most part, I think that Dave Gettleman's not going to go that route simply because he does value those big interior guys that can stop the run. I don't see him going Mcneil personally. I think he's more attracted to a guy like Tommy Tagai just because of that big run-stopping nature. That's just how I feel from Dave Gettleman's perspective, but I do see your perspective and just maximizing pass rush, just going heavy on that front, and just seeing like if we can collapse the pocket, put pressure on the quarterback consistently, you have a big advantage because now all you need is your secondary to hold up, and we know the Giants can hold up back there. All they have to do is hold up, and you're gonna force some turnovers, some errant throws, getting pressure on the quarterback, and that is a very good way to view the correlation between turnovers and pass rush.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know from the people in the comments section, what do you think? Would you rather maximize the pass rush with a guy like Mcneil, a zero tech, big hog molly who can get after the quarterback, or would you rather just solidify the run defense with a guy like Tommy Tagai and just have the big zero tech sit there and stuff the run? Like, which one do you prefer? Because personally, I want to maximize the pass rush. Alex seems to be leaning more towards solidifying the run defense, and we think that Dave Gettleman will lean that way as well, but we're curious to know, what do you guys think? Let us know in the comment section down below, or join the Discord and have a chat about it there.
Yeah, that is a very good point. For the second stage of this, obviously, I think we did miss on one major thing is the wide receiver aspect of it in free agency, because if you're going to trade back, that's because you don't feel the need to acquire a big wide receiver, tight end like Kyle Pitts in the first round. You actually say, okay, I'm going to go to free agency, I'm going to solve the offensive problems there, and we're going to go pretty much completely defensive in the draft. If you go Gregory Rousseau at 20 through 25, if you trade back that far, if you go interior defender like Tommy Tagai or Mcneil, this is a very defensive draft. So, Anthony, his scenario is a lot more opposite of the offensive overhaul scenario we did in the first video of this segment. But, we do have to see each side of things. So I do understand the idea of going completely defensive. There are some offensive players in the back end of the first round in those 20 section, there's a lot of guys like, Rashawn Bateman. There's guys like Terrace Marshall that you can go for at the wide receiver position. Even Pat Freiermuth, the tight end from Penn State. I love him. I think he's awesome. They have him being mocked in the mid-20s to late first round selections. So I think he is also a pretty good prospect to keep an eye on as we progress through this. If he falls to the second round, might be someone the Giants could look at. But for the most part, who do you think here the Giants land as a wide receiver in free agency? Because this is very, very important part of this scenario because you do have to allocate resources. John Mara and Dave Gettleman already confirmed that they will be allocating resources toward the wide receiver position.
Yeah, in terms of free agent wide receivers, it's going to get tough. I don't know if the Giants realistically can get one now with their cap situation, but if they do, I think you're going to be looking at a guy like Kenny Golladay, and I think Kenny Galladay's price might be down a little bit this year because of the injury that he just had, so it might make him a little bit more affordable and make him a little bit more attractive to the Giants because of that. And then I think there's other guys, if the Giants decide Curtis Samuel is going to be their number one wide receiver, maybe they can go with Curtis Samuel. Corey Davis, we did a discussion video, we rounded the bases, we covered all of the wide receivers that are going to be in the free agency class, so I'm not going to hit on that too hard, but in this scenario, though, if they are able to get a wide receiver under the salary cap space in terms of free agency, it just opens up so many options in the draft, which is like my point here, but, realistically, let's say that they don't land anybody in free agency, well, then with that trade down scenario, you mentioned that there's a lot of good wide receivers in this class. And the talent gap between those top guys and those second-tier guys, it's not that wide. Those guys are really good, like Rondale Moore, Terrace Marshall, Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's some really good guys that you could get at the back end of the first round or maybe even in the second round. So if the Giants didn't get a wide receiver in free agency, I still think this trade-down scenario applies because I think that you have the ability to trade down and get a wide receiver there. So, in that 20th pick range. So I think you get a wide receiver there too. So one way or another, the Giants, I think, can get a wide receiver. But in this scenario, if they are able to land Kenny Golladay is the idea that always pops to mind for me with the Giants. They've been connected before. We know the Giants were interested in trading for them. So say they land him in free agency this offseason. Maybe there's already something going on there. And that's what's that trade rumor was fabricated on. So maybe there's something going on there. They land him, and then I think you can go defense in round one because, our defense is the strength of our team. It's a good defense. But wouldn't you want to make it even better, just solidify it even further, just add a couple more pieces and see what Patrick Graham can really do when he has a fully talented defensive roster? That sounds pretty exciting to me.
I would agree. I mean, really, I'd love to see the defense take that step forward and get to the top 5 range because when you have a top 5 defense and an average offense, you can mask some deficiencies, of course. But like Kenny Golladay is that perfect 50-50 guy. He's a great route runner. He can win man coverage battles, and that's what Jason Garrett tries to open up for the offensive weapons, just really taking shots downfield in man coverage. Kenny Golladay will win those 90% of the time, unlike Darius Slade or Sterling Shepard, who might not have the best height, ball skills, 50-50 abilities. So I see where you're going with it. I prefer to be a little bit more offensive. I think I want to get a wide receiver in the first round if we can. And even if we do trade back, I would be open to taking a guy like LSU's Terrace Marshall, Rashad Bateman. There's a bunch of really, really talented guys that I do think the Giants should be looking at. I think the wide receiver class is so deep, and there's so much potential there. If we were to walk away from the draft without a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds, I'd be really disappointed. Even the first 2 rounds, I think I'd be pretty disappointed because when you have drafts that are so deep like this, you can't not, like last year we didn't allocate any draft picks toward a wide receiver. That was a terrible idea, and it showed throughout the season. We ended up using undrafted free agents like Austin Mack because we were so just poor at the position. That was a huge mistake. And I think, the Giants need to look at the offense. They've already allocated so many defensive selections. Think about just last year, the guy Xavier McKinney. Who else did they get? They had Cam Brown. They had, who was this?
Carter Coughlin.
McKinney, Carter Coughlin, Cam Brown, Darnay Holmes. They had
T.J. Brunson, Tay Crowder.
They had Williamson, he's gone. Tay Crowder. They allocated a ton of those late round picks toward the defensive side of the ball, and the second round pick, and their 4th round pick. So
they invested a lot in the defense.
They invested a lot. So I
why
like to see
stop
more
there?
Offensive. No, I mean, look, I'm also in the idea of just not trading back and getting a guy like Micah Parsons if he dropped. Obviously, this is all determined on teams that want a quarterback. right?
Yeah.
That is the entire point of this scenario, is that there are going to be teams that need a quarterback like Trey Lance,
And
need
that
a
will
guy like
happen.
Justin Fields or Zach
Someone's
Wilson if
going to
they
want to
drop.
trade up for sure.
Look, if a guy like Justin Fields or Zach Wilson drop to 11, there's going to be a team willing to give a lot of draft capital up for them. It just is the case. Look at Washington. Washington is going to need a quarterback. They do need a quarterback. I don't think that they feel comfortable going with Alex Smith forward. Maybe having him as a backup is a good scenario, but definitely not as a starter. They want to have a young guy, and obviously they just released Dwayne Haskins a couple of weeks ago. So I think we're in a prime spot to trade with Washington, get that 20th overall pick. They trade up to get a guy like Justin Fields, Trey Lance, whatnot, and we can cash in. We can get their second rounder and their third rounder, and really just maximize our draft, because like we keep mentioning, the wide receiver class is super deep. And, you can even say this. You could even make the argument, get their second rounder, package those two together, move up in the second round and get the best wide receiver available. You could do that. Maybe you wouldn't want to, but you could make the argument that it's worth doing, to trade up as high as you can and just get the best wide receiver on the board.
You could make an argument. You could make that. But I think, okay, so with this scenario that I laid out here, right, this trade down scenario, I think really the idea of it is best player available, right? So you trade down, you allocate more draft capital to those middle rounds, and you just take the best player available at pick 20. Whether that's a receiver, whether that's a tight end, whether that's a defensive lineman. The Giants are in a position where they have a lot of solid pieces on their roster, but overall they could probably use help in just about every area. Whether if it's an offensive tackle, why not? Take him, put him at right tackle, or move Andrew Thomas to right tackle. I wouldn't do that, but you know what I mean. Just take the best player available at that 20-ish range, like you should be doing if you're picking at that range, and then you have extra draft capital to spend in the middle rounds, and that's where you can start drafting for need, and you can find your interior defensive lineman to replace Dalvin Tomlinson, and you can find your receiver that can work the outside boundary, and that's when you can really get creative there with those middle round picks. But just, I think trading down, going best player available, I'm kind of a big fan of that idea, and that's kind of why I wanted to lay out this scenario. I think that, in terms of free agency, we'll see how that shakes out. If the Giants do land a wide receiver and Dalvin Tomlinson does walk, then I'm totally in the boat where, if we don't have to spend the top 11 pick on a wide receiver, then we shouldn't really have to spend the top 11 pick. Trade down and get more picks. That's kind of my line of thinking. If we don't need a wide receiver going into the draft, then I think that we should just trade down and get more draft capital.
I mean, it's totally a justifiable thing. And the one thing I do want to bring up is that Dave Gettleman has never traded back in the draft. So there's already a good probability he never will. Right?
Okay, well, I'll say this. The Joe Judge effect, right? Because they tried to trade down from 4. They didn't find any takers. So that didn't happen. Second round, when they drafted Xavier McKinney, this is like a fact here. This is the Giants had a trade offer in place with the Chicago Bears. If Xavier McKinney was drafted ahead of the Giants, they had a deal in place with the Bears to trade down. So the Bears are actually the team that I keep mock trading with in the first round of the draft. So that's, that in itself is interesting. They have a relationship making a trade. So, but basically my major point here is that the Giants did try to trade down last year, and they had a plan to do it. Just a beast Xavier McKinney was on the board, so they were like, screw that, we can't trade away from this player. So, I could see them doing it. I think it's the Joe Judge effect. I think he's here. I think he understands, working with Bill Belichick in New England and being around them. I think he understands the value of trading down and adding more capital and more assets in the middle rounds. So I could absolutely see them doing it in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally reasonable. Could totally see him doing it. And just to overview like this entire scenario for you, if you kind of got lost along the way, as we talked about a lot of different points, the entire concept here is the Giants at the 11th pick, they trade back, they acquire another second round pick and another third round pick. They use that second round pick to allocate a big interior defender, right? They get a big interior defender because they're letting Dalvin Tomlinson walk to save cap space. Then you have the second rounder where you can allocate toward a wide receiver or really anything, the best player on the board, whatever you want to go with. And then at the first round pick that they traded back from, you basically just go best player available, whether it's defense or offense. Because when you're in the mid-20s, you kind of have to go best player available. You're not really going to fill a need there because there's not like a generational or a really premium level talent there. That there's a big fall off, right? So is that essentially like the entire scenario?
Yeah, and not necessarily even a second round pick in the trade down. I think that might be asking a little too much, right? I think that realistically, though, if you trade down from 11 to around 20, you're definitely getting a third-round pick. And that third-round pick is where you get a guy like Alan
Oh, you
McNeil
can
or
get
Tommy
way more
Togiai.
than just a third rounder for trading 10 spots in the first round.
Eh,
You're giving up a quarterback. You're giving them their quarterback for just a
No,
third rounder.
it would be that pick, a third rounder, and then actually I think a fifth rounder as well. I don't know if you're getting a second round pick for that. Just personally.
No? Really?
I don't know. If you look at the draft points, there's a draft
It's
capital
later,
points
though.
chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like you're getting a third and a fifth. And that makes sense. You can get the third and the fifth. That would do a lot for the Giants in that scenario. That third round pick, like I said, could be one of those defensive linemen that we mentioned, or one of the wide receivers that we mentioned, or Brevin Jordan, tight end out of Miami. I know Alex and I were both pretty big fans of him. And then fifth round pick, if you get another fifth rounder, then you can just keep adding depth pieces, keep adding players on the offensive line, back end of the wide receiver core, secondary. Just keep adding depth with that fifth round pick, And depth is key. Depth is really key. I think all those playoff teams that we're watching right now have really good depth, and we're seeing that. That's a trend, and I think Joe Judge is very cognizant of that fact. So I think that's trading down is a realistic option for the Giants this year.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to think about, like, if, let's say, Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, maybe one of them's on the board at 11 for the Giants, and, a team comes to them like, we want to trade with you guys. You also have to factor in points for demand, right? So it's not just the draft, like, board that you're looking at or the point values for each individual pick. You also have to throw in a couple hundred there because they want their quarterback, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get their quarterback. So maybe that's an extra 300 points there. Maybe that is the difference between getting a second and third rounder and just getting a third and fifth rounder. So, there's more value there. We've seen teams give up a crap ton of assets to get their guy. We've seen it in the past. I think the Giants could pull it off again. So we'll see what happens here. Obviously, there's a lot of time. We're going to be doing a ton of different scenarios: offensive, defensive, trade backs, and whatnot. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. And as always, my friends, thank you so much for the support, all the love on YouTube, and make sure to go check it out on YouTube if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, because I include the videos, the film that you can see from the players that we are talking about, get a better idea of like what we see in them and why they could be a good, suitable fit for the Giants. But as always, my friends, thank you so much, and we will catch you guys on the next one.